At this point, I would like to bring in my guest. We have him back. Kennedy Carter is here today. Thank you so much for taking the time, Kennedy.
Hi. Can you hear and see me well?
I can hear and yep. You're a little dark, but I can hear you pretty good. So
yeah, I've heard that before.
So
let's see. Let's get you. I want y'all to see me.
There you go.
Let's get this light on me. Yeah, there we go.
There we go. See a little bit there. Yep. All right. So I wanted to start by you're working on some stuff for us on the social media side. Kennedy, for those viewers that don't know, is with Real Progressives. Can you talk a little bit about what we're doing with some of these expanding what platforms we're on and where people can get involved if they're interested?
Heck yeah, absolutely. Actually, it would actually be even easier for your guests if I have the ability to share my screen as I continue to relay some of that. Is that an ability that I have?
Try to set it up so you can do that. I'm not.
Well, I see the ability here to share, so maybe it's just something you have to request. So if I hit share screen here, do you see something that pops up that says, let me do it? You should see it maybe now.
Oh, yep. Add to stream. There we go.
Sick. Okay, so just give me a minute here as I pull up my resources. And so what I would like to focus on, to give a little background here, it's a little hot too. Real Progressives is a real opportunity, I think, for leftists with the MMT informed lens to be able to bring a lot of people together in YouTube, not necessarily even people that are MMT oriented, because a lot of YouTube, if you follow people like, if you've ever heard of Destiny or Vosh, these people that are, just streaming for hours and they're gaming and they're doing reaction videos on political news or they're debating people, like that's a real opportunity for MMT people. As someone who's watched a lot of hours of that and is pursuing a degree in economics, like I think it'd be really, really helpful to have someone denature some of that with an MMT lens, just because, when you go home and you just want to game or whatever, and these people are like split screen, some of those ideas still get in their head. So if they were doing that to people in the Real Progressives organization, I hope to start maybe a consortium of people who are able to do this thing where they're gaming, playing chess, League, Dragon Ball Z, Star Wars, whatever it is, and be able to have people come home, relax, chill, pull up our streams, be in our Discord, chat with us while we're getting our business done. And I'm more than willing to be able to have a lot of these debates, because MMT, I think, changes the left-right debate a lot and changes a lot of the zero-sum thinking. I mean, with what you were talking about earlier, and Rashida Tlaib, these politicians who are gerrymandered and not to having more representation, like there's a real opportunity to get people being like, oh shit, we don't have to hurt each other for us to get here. And a lot of YouTube leftism is about that. Well, we're eventually going to have to kill the Nazis. We're eventually going to have to do like hurtful things to each other because there's no other way. There's only the zero-sum option. And I don't want to make people feel dumb. I come from a conservative background myself. And so knowing and not being one myself and feeling grace still with the culture I grew up in, it's easy for me to not make people feel like, because of the information they didn't know, and I didn't know until recently, that they're not stupid. So before I end that, you can continue as I pull up the stream, because I'm going to give you an example of what I'm talking about.
Perfect. Yeah. No, I think that's a really profound point, Kennedy. And I think people immediately shut down when they're told you don't understand, you're stupid, so if that's even implied, even if it's really not meant, if that's even implied, you've just shut somebody down from hearing what you're trying to say. And the other point I want to make is at one point I was pretty much a partisan Democrat, and I didn't know MMT until I was taught it, right? So you can't hold people's ignorance against them. If they haven't been exposed to this stuff, they haven't been exposed to it. So I do think that's an important mentality to keep in mind for the viewers too, when they're potentially out talking MMT with people, is this person might not know at all what you're talking about. So don't slam them like it, anyhow. Yeah. If you had any thoughts on that.
No, I couldn't have said it any better. I'm really just here to listen to you, because I'm really I feel like what you do is a part of the consortium that I'm trying to create. Like there needs to be people out here reviewing this stuff and talking about it from an MMT lens and letting people know that these are our options here. So I'm just here to have you talk to me about whatever you need to, and rift as long as we need to.
Well, I appreciate
pull this up.
part of the coalition. Yeah, if you want to pull up the social media stuff. And yeah, it's, I think it's important to put this stuff in some different contexts too, where people, I think sometimes people, they're in modes of like, I'm gonna do something fun and I'm gonna let my brain relax for a little bit. And if you can catch them in that mode and actually slip some information in a way that's not like, I'm gonna lecture you, or I'm gonna, I think there's an avenue there to maybe reach some people that otherwise might not be as inclined to come find content like this.
Ooh, well said. Actually, I'm going to send this to you because I'm on an old laptop as I'm working from
no problem
home.
Yeah,
so
I'll try to bring it up.
Yeah. I mean, I used to have a really, really nice laptop that we created an all VPN source on. So I'm unable to do what I usually was able to do. But I'm sending you this link now, and you can go ahead and share your screen. And then Perfect. I'll go ahead and describe it. And this will be a really, really good example, I think.
And briefly for the viewers, bottom of the screen there, Kennedy's Twitter handle. If you don't follow him, make sure you do so. He's always got some outside the box views on things and a great way of looking at economics. We're going to get a little bit later into some of that stuff too after the social media.
Oh yeah. All right. Yeah. You're getting this link now. So go ahead and share that when you're ready.
Will do.
And you can just go to any moment in the video, probably mid, so that you get a full view of what's going on.
Let me make sure I'm sharing with volume here.
Here, I'm going to add more light too for you.
I'm sorry, guys. I'm having trouble bringing this up. Let's try one more time.
Okay. You pulled it up. Okay, yeah. So go ahead and skip to some of that. Maybe the mid portion of it.
It keeps dying on me. I don't think I can share this. It just keeps going away. I'll try one more time. Sorry to the viewers for the technical difficulties.
Happens to the best of us.
See if it'll do it this time. No. Where'd you go? There we went. Okay.
Yeah. So can your viewers hear some of the commentary?
Yep.
Okay. So what's happening here, what I think is lovely. So Vosh started in 2019. Dude makes, 280K. But what's beautiful about this opportunity is because a lot of people are gaming, in their free time. An opportunity like this, if he's watching a debate where Charlie Kirk is debating someone about abortion, and so he goes through the whole debate, while he's gaming with people in the Discord chat on what looked like, I think was Diablo 3. And so what this gives me the opportunity to do is for me as a gamer in my pastime, to be able to bring a lot of these people in on those notes, for gaming and for conversations to chill. And then they have me in the background getting this information. And that's sort of what he was able to do. I mean, you saw hundreds of thousands of views for that one. And when you do that for hours, I mean, that just works with the algorithm and is able to help us progress the more we have people doing that. I think what's so unique about doing this. Oh, continue.
I just wanted to confirm this is Twitch. Is that correct?
Yeah. So he's streaming on Twitch or his own website. I don't know because he was banned from Twitch recently. So he may be streaming from his own website.
But RP's going to be doing this through Twitch.
Yeah, I'm going to be doing it through Twitch and also through Discord and allowing people to either stream. If it's in a serious debate or conversation like this, someone else can be showing off. And I'm also a Smash player. So the opportunity to get some of these conversations in with these, maybe even right wingers, and have conversations with people while we play Smash is, I think, a really, really beautiful opportunity. Because I mean, the best conversations happen during Smash.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So for the viewers, make sure you check out Real Progressives on Discord and Twitch if you're interested in getting involved with this stuff. And I think it's a fantastic medium. Is this gonna? I guess, can you just explain a little bit? I just have not been on Twitch. So how as a social media, how is it built in terms of social media? Is there an easy way to reach audiences?
So what I think is so interesting, especially because I was a Discord person before I got into a lot of this. My buddies from high school and college, like after 6 p.m. after they get off work, I can see them hop on Discord, and they're playing games like Valorant, they're playing games like Smash, what have you, chess, even board games, and so you're able to just have, if you want some of that parasocial connection, they just jump in a little bit after work, and so sharing through the algorithms is really nice, because when you're people, if they want to have super chats and they want to be able to communicate or have a moment where they get to say something or have a moment where they get to stream something, maybe they'll submit $5, submit $2. And if you're doing that over 3 hours, that's a really good way to build community, but also to monetize and help build your organization through the work that you're doing. And I think that's what's going to be a necessity, because these YouTube, I mean, Destiny, if you've heard of him, he's a millionaire or close to it, if not more. So like that ability to talk to people on that level and not have it be so focused on MMT is also going to drive our algorithms in a different way, because then people are going to be looking up streams for their, regular gaming situations, and then they're just going to happen to stumble upon the commentary. And I think that's the key right there, is getting people to just stumble upon it and not feel it like that's what they have to do in the background. And then we're just going to have more people doing that.
It takes it out of that like economic silo, because some people just as soon as you kind of like make them feel like you're in this academic space, they kind of not interested, or that's too much. It's it doesn't feel fun. It feels like you're having to do homework or something. And so yeah, I think that's all absolutely fantastic. I think reaching people with MMT in any way that we possibly can is fantastic, and reaching out to audiences that otherwise might not engage is all the better. And I really like the attitude of like, let's talk to anybody. You know what I mean? It's not that everybody's our ally, or that it's let's talk to everybody. Like, let's, you know what I mean? I really appreciate that attitude in general.
Thank you.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit about like how we view work and employment, right?
Ooh.
And I covered a story last week that I wanted to get your thoughts on, and it's all of the things happening with college athletes. It seems rather arbitrary and ridiculous to me that we've always considered them not to be workers because they're students, right? The comparison I made last week was, if LeBron James took an online class, is he no longer able to make his money because he's now a student athlete? Like, it seems so arbitrary and ridiculous to me that we do this. So now, fortunately, there is a players union forming for college football players. It's going to take years to implement, and they're also courts have now allowed college players in certain circumstances to take sponsorships, so they can at least make some money on their likeness as athletes. So I'm just curious what your thought is on kind of how we view workers in this way, and how we're progressing on those issues.
I mean, I really appreciate it. That's quite a hardball question for me, because sports are not a thing for me. I come from non-team sports, swimming and boxing. So my love for sports has never been huge, especially with American football being just little car accidents as a sport. I feel like it's the reason other countries haven't picked them up. So when it comes to jobs, and I mean, the only sports thing I've ever watched is Ted Lasso recently. So when it comes to sports, I definitely feel like, considering I went to Xavier, which was a huge basketball school, and knowing that I went to that school because it is known for its healthcare institutions and the opportunities that provides for people. I was able to have a wonderful institution education that I don't regret, but knowing that more of the money was funneling towards the basketball program, because that's kind of what Xavier is also known for, was something I thought about heavily, because if those were just federal student workers, or if they were just paid, as a part of the program, I think it would be very, very different. But I think because, if you really want to get in the weeds of it, because sports in America is also institutionalized as like this way for investors to have their stadiums and their little sports institutions in the center of cities, as opposed to maybe a train stop. Like the way that sports is able to convene public area, and the way people do with their weekend times. What are people doing right now? Probably watching some type of Sunday sport, and it's specifically right here. So I think when it comes to sports and the way that people are scouted, I hear a lot that there are not a lot of African Americans in certain sports, but when you think about our culture and what sports are marketed to us,
right,
you get into a whole different conversation. So I'm all for paying the hell out of anyone doing any type of athletic, I mean, work in general, if you're spending your time doing something, and that's what's beauty about MMT, you need to be paid for it, and you need to be paid livably. And arguably, we're going to be better off if you do. Like these student athletes should be able to not focus so much on sports being their life, because I mean, they're going to hit 50 and be really struggling really soon. So like that's, it's not
well,
really...
and in football, like 50 struggling with a bunch of brain damage and like altered mentally, you know, like I can't even, and you know, my thing is, like, I think it's absurd in many ways how much weight we put on sports, and to your point about the stadiums, and like, you know, when the top athletes make 30 million a year and paramedics make nothing, and like there's all sorts we could, you know what I mean. But in the case of college football, what drives me so ballistic about it is it's like a $10 billion industry, and all that money is going to TV executives and the people running the universities, and you know what I mean, instead of the people who are actually destroying their bodies for the entertainment, you know, so I think it kind of presents an interesting look at how we actually view employment and work.
Right. As if the CEOs aren't, people aren't going to still watch football and basketball if the CEOs make 20 times less than they do.
It's that specific guy at TNT that makes you want to watch, you know, like no, it's the people on the so to kind of pivot to another, like, I think right now we're seeing people's attitudes towards their work shifting drastically. I think a lot of it has to do with the pandemic and just kind of having a perspective shift. I think a lot of people were maybe concerned they were going to lose their life to COVID, or concerned they were going to lose a loved one, or God forbid even did lose a loved one to COVID. And I think that really alters your perspective on your life and how you want to spend your time, and how, you know, what work means to you and to your community. Can you just speak a little bit to that attitude shift and what you're seeing in terms of people's perception of their work and their role in society?
Oh man, well, that's a partially personal question, because I actually discovered economics as a result of this pandemic. To lay my cards on the table, I had been a volunteer for Elizabeth Warren, not getting what I wanted out of the policies and the prescriptions for her and Bernie Sanders. So I wanted to know the minds behind them, and learning about Stephanie Kelton and Gabriel Zuckman and all the economists behind them, where the policies were being written. That's where I got this jump. And then it happened that within the months of me discovering that, the pandemic started, and I've lost people, quite a few people in my life that should be still here if had it not been for COVID. But one of the things that keeps me going, and somehow crazily I still find hope in, is that this moment when we all got those stimulus checks, when we all billions of us did this thing that humanity's never done before, to try and manage a disease together. I think it really served as an opportunity to view our interdependence and that foundation that MMT offers, that money is this tool of law. So what we write as law, what we write together, what we decide is interchangeable, is what money is. It's not something that exists in the ground, and that changes everything. And I've been able to find hope in knowing that the more people, I think, feel that in their hearts, know it, imagine it, and dream it, the more we can tell the stories about ourselves and change the systems that we need to do. Because I'm also a huge proponent of human nature and anthropology arguments, because I also believe if you understand how money works, if you think that human beings are naturally brutally selfish assholes, you're not gonna provision MMT in a way that's accurate either. You're gonna still do harmful stuff. So I think we have to design stories about ourselves that are more empathetic and compassionate to see that and trust it. And that's part of the interdependence, because the scarcity that we build is all manufactured.
Yeah. I think that's a really fantastic point. Can you speak a little bit to everyone that I've talked to that gets MMT, it's like it changes their politics in certain ways. How did it change the way that you viewed the world when it all kind of clicked?
Yeah, that's funny you asked that too, because I also read in the middle of that, there was also the book called Ezra Klein, Why We're Polarized. And so I was very, very, very focused before economics on the incentives of political institutions, because I truly, before I got into that and the human nature stuff, believed that people aren't just evil. People are doing the things that they're doing in their job that the job lets them do. And so, for example, learning banks are just public utilities was like that for me. Of course, of course, the National Bank, and knowing that the history of banks from a book called The Color of Money. And I mean, everyone's seen Hamilton at this point. We attempted to have a national bank and we didn't. And then the slave states had their own banks that African Americans couldn't get their dollar in. And then when we created the dollar, we now had a currency that was equal value for white and black people. So that kind of history and feeling that, learning it has just made the way I view politics so different. And it's also made me see, as someone that lives in Ohio, Michigan, like two of the most gerrymandered states in the country, like the opportunity for us to just change those. Like if we changed gerrymandering and filibustering, we have, this is like a whole weedsy thing for me, but like we have no concept for the last 20 years what it would have been like if Democrats had 20% less people to focus on. They could say fuck you to the Joe Manchin. Excuse me if I'm not allowed to say that. I apologize.
Oh no, please say fuck you to Joe Manchin, please.
Okay. Well, they wouldn't have really needed Joe Manchin in their party to capitulate to, and Republicans would have needed not only the Joe Manchins, but they would have needed a few of us to be able to win. And that we have no idea what that alternative history would have looked like. But I think if we do that, we change those policies immediately and then push MMT as hard as we can, we're walking into an alternative, like a future that I think a lot of hope is not really focused on, but I'm really focused on. So that's how it's sort of changed my politics, is that I don't think I'll live to see all of the beauty of what's going to happen, but I'm really excited for what people like you and me are going to do to set the stage.
Yeah, I do find a little bit of hope in seeing, I mean, even just a year or two ago, so many fewer people were talking about this stuff. It has in some senses penetrated the mainstream and you know, at least portions of it. Seeing Yarmouth, like acknowledging this stuff has been huge for me, where it's like, oh my God, a budget chair that's like, you know, it's cool to see that kind of stuff. It's, you know, and yeah, I also think, you know, this kind of actually pairs with another big discussion that's happening right now that kind of turned into a culture war, in my view, unnecessarily. And that's like the critical legal theory, critical race theory stuff, right? Like, how do you actually perceive the institutions in your society? And do you acknowledge that certain forms of oppression are just cooked into them, that they were built to maintain the status quo for those who are currently enjoying the status quo, right? It seems illogical for the powerful to make institutions that would be to their detriment. And that's kind of all that we're talking about. And money, when you take this exogenous view on, not to get too wonky, but when you think money comes from authorities and not as some natural organic formation of markets, you know, as MMT acknowledges it does, it's always been part of the authorities. You really do change how you view monetary policy and fiscal policy. It's like, oh, so you're just choosing to let people suffer. It's not like you're just mad at your job. You're just like, fuck those people. You know what I mean? It totally shifts your mindset.
What's funny about what you just said too is that it, in some ways, it makes it this, and I don't know how much of a hot take this is, but in some ways, it makes it easier for me to sometimes talk with libertarianish people versus like very hardcore left people, because I think when you take the idea seriously, like when my mother was in one of the rooms for the Stop the Steal vote, you know, like in Wayne County, just counting our votes, and so just watching what could have been like the loss of someone in my life from a conspiracy theory that was just made up on the spot, just watched it be created, but also taking seriously that that's the only information you're getting. And if you accept that zero-sum thing, that like, well, when you have more immigrants and more progressive votes, your country is going to be denatured like all of these other countries. I'm able to, like, there's something in me from coming from conservative backgrounds in Detroit, but also feeling grace where that comes from and not agreeing with it, to be able to understand it deeply. And knowing that those ideas are like just a little, I think what's key to it is that when people feel like they've been fooled, they're much more salient to changing their mind than if you have to open up your emotional vulnerability to the idea that maybe the way you orient your life or the way you orient community needs to be adjusted. Or maybe there are toxic, unhealthy habits that you have in your own life that then extend to the way that you do politics. And I've found that, like, when people assume that things were made this way, but then they've been fooled, if people are open to expand, that's that whole like sociology, like openness to experience versus closeness thing that people have, empathy and versus compassion. How people lie on that spectrum has nothing to do with left or right. And so I've found that, like, when people get denatured and realizing that they're being fooled, especially if they're libertarian, they're like, well, wait, so they could come in the legal way, and so they're just doing this on purpose. Like, it makes a lot of sense, especially because a lot of right wingers are spending time telling us that, like, there's an enemy out there, but if the enemy is viewed as like a minority community, like it just changes so many things. And I've had more conversations with ease with that versus people that are like, well, I've experienced this trauma from the white race as like a person of minority, and I feel like I deserve my own ethno state, and that's a more difficult route to take because there are emotions behind that.
Yeah, that definitely is going to create a more explosive debate or argument, or however you want to put it. I think it's very profound to say people are more willing to accept that they've been lied to than like something about how you are processing it is wrong, right? Because then it's a personal attack. Then it's like you don't understand because something about you is not capable of understanding, as opposed to all these powerful people have lied to you, and that like they've lied to everybody, and it makes it not a personal attack. I think that's an important way to approach it. Thank you. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to all this gaming stuff, Kennedy, because I think you have a really good attitude towards, engaging people on all of these kinds of issues. I am curious to get your thoughts on, I feel like I've talked about this ad nauseum, but it is what's going on right now is the reconciliation bill, and how you view the repeat it effectively of the Obama administration, where a lot of promises are made during the campaign, and then they're not met, and then come midterms, the Democrats are going to be upset that they lost, and like what happened, and the rotating villain with Manchin and Sinema. I mean, there's so much to talk about, but I'll kind of give you the floor. What do you think about all of this that's been going on, and all the things that have been gutted from the bill, and how do you see it proceeding?
Thank you for asking that. Okay, so know that my answer is of two minds, and with everything in our political system as a Westerner, I have to view things with two minds because the incentives aren't, I don't think, structured in a way for me to not have that dual space. So on the one hand, you have the fact that like Joe Biden and the administration knows this information. Like if you like the mint the coin drama, like knowing that they know the public, they have an opinion that the public shouldn't understand how money works and that we have to keep up this game for a little bit is a very, very dark and almost more insidious thing than I think a lot of Republicans can do, because I think Republicans are operating in a more theological moral space. If we're being really honest, they're arguing from a more, and considering the things that they focus on, abortion, trans rights, these things that are about sociological discussions, that's what they're focused on making their game. But for Democrats to make that argument, that's about human nature. You're saying something about humans' intrinsic ability not to be able to understand information and make good decisions on it. So part of me about that boils my blood, and I haven't. I'm very upset with the opportunity that they have at their hand, but knowing that they're not doing anything about it. Now, here's the second mind, and this is coming from the incentives focus and someone who can imagine being in that room, being in that seat, is that because Democrats are intrinsically in our system since 1964, when I got the right to vote, like they need 65% to win. And so when you're always thinking in your head about your incentives and the fact that you need at least 10 to 15% of people who are very right wing and have these theological moral foundations that they don't agree with, you need them to vote for you too. That changes the incentives of what you think you're able to do if you want to be successful. Like, because our role here as media figures and people like reaching out in community is to just spread the word. But when you're in that role, you have the public service role attached to that work. And so because Democrats, Joe Manchin shouldn't exist. Manchin exists because the Senate orients rural votes in a way that Republicans don't need to compete for the cities that they manage. And so, I saw something the other week about him considering voting, switching another party. And I'm just like, it also takes a little bit of history to look at the Whigs and other parties that have been in similar situations. And I feel like Democrats, January is going to reach a certain point. I reached out to Tim Ryan about the job guarantee. And one of the things that was discussed to me and makes it difficult to argue about public policies, that the filibuster won't matter. They won't care. They'll send an email and then it won't go to the floor. So it doesn't matter because of Joe Manchin. And so what I want to focus on is getting everyone carrying the hell out of gerrymandering and the filibuster and remove those pieces that let them cheat. Because what that would do is just change our politics intrinsically in the way that they're oriented now, and just be a little bit easier like other countries have. And so that's just the main point about like I I understand my blood boils about the decisions that they're making, but I also understand like there's a Senate rate right now. It's 49-50 Democrats, and in January, I mean, student debt has been in this limbo for almost 2 years now. I
longer.
fully suspect in the next 2 months, if Tim Ryan wins that election and they're able to get 52-48, they're going to do something they're going to try to do stuff. But I don't like that strategy. You know, even if that is their like progressive long-term strategy, I still disagree and hate with it because you're not letting people know that like, hey, the reason we're not passing shit is because of these fucking people that won't let us, and we need to have these little stupid rules disappear. Like if they need to put money into caring about that, and they don't, and that boils the hell out of my blood. So it makes me more mad.
So for the next stage, supposing we get there, the next like problem that I might present is I do think there are quite a few Democrats who are all too happy to not have to be the Manchin or Sinema that's the public facing, I don't want to pass this, but that do take a lot of big donations and are all too happy to kind of hide behind that rotating villain. You know what I mean? So how do you does that in your mind come down to kind of just the rank corruption that both parties engage in, or at least that a lot of members of both parties engage in, or how do you get at that incentive structure, even if we were to get past the filibuster, the voting rights? I mean, if I had my way, we'd abolish the Senate, but at least get rid of the archaic rules and things. How do we proceed once we actually get to the point that there's less of an issue partisan wise, and it really does become how do we get this party to represent us in the ways that we want it to?
That is a beautiful question. You asked a better question like media figures asked, the popular media figures about that kind of stuff.
I appreciate that. Hey, if I can't beat Jake Tapper, what am I doing up here, right?
Great question. So my answer to that is that the incentives. So I'm able to. I'm a very imaginative person, as my therapist has relayed to me back in the past, and so it's very, very easy for me to get into the space of like what the incentive structures could be. And my bachelor's in healthcare, like I was taught to understand you're in a village. I mean, and people are illiterate, but you need to build a healthcare system that matches Cradle, like Cincinnati. Go. Like, so understanding the systematic approach from the ground up is something I like think about thoroughly. And so if I imagine a filibuster change, what that would do to Republicans, because they're still going to need to win unless they want to end up like the Whigs. And then you already have looked into politicians that are fiending on this. So Marco Rubio, for example, reached out to Stephanie Kelton. So Marco Rubio knows MMT. And what's going to happen in the next 10 years when trans activism and like economic inequality becomes less difficult to argue about, and we get more into like labor policy, Marco Rubio is going to be right there for it. He's aware of it, and he's going to know how to capitulate and change his rhetoric in order to like be safe in that space. But that also means you're gonna have people that kind of want to vote for. You know what I mean? Like if he's going to be arguing for things that like we actually agree with, that's going to change our incentive structure too, because it's not happening. We don't have, for progressive people, another side where anyone's offering anything that's relative to like our vision of the future, or like a collective vision of the future for any community that's existed. Because it's a very what's happening is a very right-wing theological moral argument that they're producing that's supported by this capitalist idea that MMT is trying to denature. So to answer your question finally, I think you would see what would happen is you'd have a lot more progressive Democrats, just straight up. You'd have a lot more people that live in big cities able to run and be as progressive as they want. And you'd also have a lot of right-wing people that are able to be more left and to present maybe more libertarian ideas, but they're going to shift the party in an orientation that, I mean, for the same reason that the slave power no longer exists, or the certain powers don't longer exist, they're just going to disappear. And it doesn't, a lot of people think that it has to go away with time, and basically people dying. And I'm not about that. Like, I think people of all ages are able to change their minds. That's why we were in love with these very old politicians. So I think people have when the filibuster is released, that's like the floodgates for MMT's opportunity. Because then if everyone knows that like, oh wait, we have majority rule for stuff now, and we can also talk about money being this thing that's intrinsically tied to our new majoritarian politics. Who knows?
I appreciate the optimism there. That gives me a little glimpse of hope in terms of electoral politics actually serving something in a way that they haven't in quite some time, at least through the neoliberal era. Yeah, I'm also curious to get your thoughts on you mentioned kind of as we progress to as certain like cultural hot button issues right now, they all tend to calm down, right, as the debates happen and one side kind of takes over, and then it becomes easier to make these arguments, and a majority comes to consensus, and then you move on to perhaps the more labor side of things. And I'm curious how you look at as we continue to automate things more, and as the
Oh,
economy moves in the direction it's going, what kind of jobs, like maybe out of the box service sector jobs, things like this, like you mentioned something about video games last time that you were on the show, about how jobs could be created in that field. Can you just talk about some of the out of the box opportunities that might present themselves
oh my
as
God, yes. I love talking about the change in value for work that MMT opportunities, especially since I focused a lot on anthropology and the way that we used to do work for the 300,000 years that we lived before we started farming. So
mm-hmm.
that, I mean, and that's part of the human nature stuff, because a lot of what we assume in society comes from like, oh, well, we start with Mesopotamia and the Greeks and the Egyptians, but we lived for 280,000 years before that.
Before that, yes.
In the same way that we live now, without the
Yeah.
scarcity for food, without diseases. So we should be focused on that lifestyle as a way to orient ourselves, not like how to expand on what Egypt was doing,
Mm-hmm.
So with work being defined differently, like what's an example that I love? Like when it comes to video games, like if you're a person that loves chess, chess is very, very mind stimulating. So someone that isn't able to walk has the opportunity to be paid a livable wage to just sit and talk and communicate with someone who maybe doesn't have, a support system anymore, or is in hospice, and their family doesn't have the time to like give that to them. They could be paid, to sit there and play with them, give them that time. But that's not really a private institution is not going to pay someone $22 an hour to sit and do that. But
Yeah.
we can, and that the idea that wouldn't be beneficial to both of them is ridiculous. So and when you brought up automation, because I actually just watched Dune.
Oh, yep.
And so the idea of like the spectrums of what we will do with machinery, like there's the Dune alternative of just fully analog, no robots, or the Star Wars universe where robots exist as our like basically our slaves. I didn't want to say that, but like I didn't know another way else to put that. But they exist as an extension of us. And a lot of the art depictions about AI and automation being these things that take away people, a lot of that comes from very cynical Hobbesian views of the future. And women getting into computer science now have changed a lot of this. And this is gonna mess you up a little bit. But what's likely going to happen with machines is that we're gonna, when you update a software, no one thinks about this that it's killing something. But once machines start to get recognized and just be an extension of our software that can constantly be changed, because the idea that machines can't just be written code differently makes no sense, because they're just extensions of us. So once they start to get recognized sentiently, we're not gonna know how much they were suffering before we recognize their suffering, kind of thing. And that really, really messes with me, because in Star Wars, it's not like they don't have stuff to do. I mean, and I have part of my article goes into the cynicism of Star Wars itself and in the scarcity that they present, even though everyone's still having jobs. So I really have hope that it doesn't have to be written in our future that machines take over. Machines should be making it easier for us to do fun stuff with our work. That's how we should be viewing it. Like, I don't want to do this stuff. Machine takes care of it. And then maybe when it's sentient, we have it, get respect or something. But they'll always just be extensions of us. So they should just be ways that we value each other and go back and hone back to our freestyle of life. Not like, well, they're taking away our jobs. There's nothing to do now.
Yeah. I like to say it's the problem with automation is not that there's less to do. The problem with automation is that all of that benefit is going to a very particular small group of people, right? Mm-hmm. So instead of that machine taking hours away from workers and saying to the workers, hey, so I guess you're only working 30 instead of 40 this week. You get more time with your family. You get to live a more robust life. You get an extra week off every year, whatever. Instead of saying that, we say, let's just send those profits up to the top. So it's really a public policy issue more so than an automation issue. I was hoping you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean that's what MMT really helps denature is that unemployment is a public choice that we have in order for businesses to somehow have a pool of labor that they sometimes use for cheap product building. So the idea that unemployment being a public choice really helps denature helps show the idea that this is a public policy issue and what we could choose to value for each other. I mean, there would be people that would have to change their income as a result of it. Because how many jobs exist right now where people aren't getting paid enough for how clearly valuable they are and getting paid way more for how valuable they think it is or that banks allow them to finance. I mean, part of the I mean, just seen a lot of research about the BS of accounting and financing. Like, if that could be more automated because of the way that we view money, thousands, maybe millions of jobs in accounting right now would just go away. I mean, I love the way MMT talks about healthcare as someone who studied it, because if healthcare becomes the streamlined institution without the bureaucracy, a lot of like the billing services, a lot of the customer service, quality assurance services would go right away. And you need to have those, you can't just leave those people unemployed. We need to have a pool. And I think that's partially to go back to what you were talking about earlier. People in office know that. And I don't know whether it's not they're not imaginative enough to like rhetorically talk about that or they're not agreeing with it, but that's what's being presented to us is that once you know this information, you get your blood boiled at the idea of like, why aren't you working on imagining this and talking to people about it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you hit on something really key there, and that's like how we like what we value, right? So what do we consider to be a job worth doing just as a society? And you mentioned too, like private institutions are not going to fund something that's not profitable. We know that. But what do we as a society value? What are we willing to prioritize and things like that? And I think a lot of these service jobs could fall into that category. Do you think that lack of understanding in Washington is you kind of started to touch on this, but do you think that's ignorance or do you think that's them thinking that the public is so behind on the issue that if they come out and say, I want to spend a bunch, that they're going to sound irresponsible to a general public that equates that with household spending and therefore hurt them at the polls kind of a thing?
The latter is definitely something Democrats do. I think what you just described is the incentive structure behind MMT in the political sphere in America. Exactly. I like very well said, because Democrats have to think about that. But the reason our incentive structure is so fucked and what's happened since 1964 and that no one really, really, really focuses on gerrymandering and the filibuster is that Republicans don't have to give a shit about that. All they have to do is get 20 to 30% of the population riled up in certain areas, and they don't have to capitulate to our votes. And the problem is that problem has been increasing over time. So different generations of people have different conceptions of that. So for us, it is so vagrantly apparent because it's gotten so bad. But maybe for people that were born in the 80s, it was only just a little bit. You were only just seeing the sights of it. People that were watching certain television programs and getting into computers in cities. But now that rural and city politics has gotten so swayed, and if you've ever heard of contact theory, all that means is Democrats, and not Democrats, but cities form this structure where people of different cultures they're down the street. So intrinsically, you're unable to dehumanize them as easier as you would if they were further away. And so that's partially the only reason why Democrats have the sway that they do, is because most people live in cities, and most people that live in cities are also seeing people of different cultures, which makes it harder for them to agree with policies that would dehumanize someone for economic or ethnic value. And because we allow a sway for rural voters, like Ohio is 7 times less important than Wyoming for some reason, even though it's the 6th largest state, that kind of sway is just going to cause it's a form of discrimination, I think, but it's also just going to cause a very mind-numbing sense of what's going on if you're not very, very hyper-focused on those incentive structures.
Absolutely, yeah, I 100% agree. That's very well said. And if the last thing I want to get to is to kind of tie all this together, at least a couple of these pieces together. If we got to a place where some of those institutional barriers were broken down, and we had a populace that understood MMT better, or at least a majority or something understood MMT. How do you see the public reacting to specifically the narratives when a bill like the reconciliation bill comes up of how are we going to pay for it?
Ooh.
Do you see that landing in the same way if we were to break these barriers down, or how would politicians have to react if that was no longer a point that's sold to the public?
Okay, and part of my article goes into this too, is that I don't want to prescribe too much about what like the alternative future for something that we have not yet realized would be.
Sure.
From my perspective. It's because there's so much beauty in what people could describe about what needs to happen that I have no imagination for. But if people understand that intrinsically, man, who knows? But the step that actually is before that I think is tied to what you're saying is the oh shit moment. I think what we're going to have is a lot of oh shit moments throughout the country of people realizing that this is the case. And I think you're going to see different sways about how people respond to that. I think you're going to see a lot of people being like, well, if money means nothing, well, we can do all of the wars that we want. We can pay for all of the state-run institutions to make sure that women aren't getting abortions. Like, we can use the government resources to do all the right-wing things that we want. And that also is a space that exists in other countries too. It's just not very common in America for people to be that blatant about their policies since 1964. But I think that's what you're going to see. You're going to see people be on the, especially since our media is still so right-wing focused, you're probably going to see way more of that first in those oh shit moments. I mean, you're already seeing Tucker Carlson do it a lot. He understands little bits of MMT being these resources that Congress holds. And what he's doing now is spunning up, all of these conspiracies that make people distrust the government. And so once you understand MMT, you're not going to get involved with that conspiratorial understanding of money. Let the elites like Tucker Carlson handle it. So that's sort of the not maybe pessimistic, but darker reaction that I think we're going to see once people start to realize that, as Republicans still hold power. But I think what comes out of that is people viewing the interdependence of each other that, man, who knows, right? Like, and part of my article goes into space art and space travel and gaming, and the idea that like we're going to start probably developing new art that tells this story, and that's what we're going to start honing into.
That's fantastic stuff. Yeah, absolutely fantastic stuff. Well, Kennedy, first of all, actually, where is that article? I want to plug it.
Oh, it's in its conclusion right now, but it's a 3,000 page worder, but it goes into Star Wars and swap lines. It's going to be a beauty. So I would love for everyone to check it out.
Very much looking forward to reading that. Make sure to the audience that you're following Kennedy on Twitter to make sure you don't miss that article and all of his other content at @the_KMC_. Kennedy, thank you so much for joining again today. I hope to have you on again soon. I always so enjoy our conversations, and I appreciate you taking the time.
Agree, Luke. I look forward to the next time. I really do.
Perfect. Talk to you soon.
Keep up the great work.
I appreciate it. Bye.
All right. Fantastic segment there, you guys. I'm so thrilled to see Kennedy getting involved with all these other social media platforms and putting this information out there and having these conversations with everybody. He gave me a little bit of optimism. I'm usually such a fucking pessimist about politics, and I appreciate Kennedy injecting a little bit of hope into the discourse today. That was a fantastic segment. Just a couple more stories.